Netflix's hit show Tiger King has become an absolute phenomenon, and the internet has been asking one question over and over again. Did Carole Baskin kill her husband, Don Lewis? Before we can get to the ultimate question of whether Carole is guilty of murder, she would have to be prosecuted. So, could a prosecutor actually bring a case against Carole Baskin for the murder of Don Lewis based on the evidence in Tiger King? All of you cool cats and kittens, let's get into it right now. By now, you have undoubtedly heard the allegations that Carole Baskin murdered her husband, Don Lewis, and did something horrific with the body, maybe even fed Don to the tigers. It may come as a surprise, but there actually is no statute of limitations for murder in the state of Florida. Accordingly, there is nothing that would stop Aramis Ayala, Florida state's attorney, from bringing charges against Carole Baskin if she thought that there was enough evidence to convict Baskin of murder. But that brings us to the heart of the matter. Does the Tiger King documentary actually contain enough evidence for a prosecutor to indict Carole Baskin? Let's look at this the same way a prosecutor would. We'll look at the law and the evidence, at least the public evidence that we know about, and decide if a prosecutor could actually bring a case against everyone's favorite cool cat. Let's start with the law. What would the state of Florida have to prove to convict someone of murder? For first-degree murder, which is what we will look at in this video and the most likely charge if one were to be brought, the prosecution would have to establish the following. Specific intent to kill, meaning that the killing was not an accident, done in an act of rage or somehow otherwise unintentional. The killing was premeditated, meaning that there was some planning involved. The planning can be very quick, but it has to be there. A person was killed, and the killing was unlawful, meaning there was no legal justification such as self-defense. All of these elements must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, what is required to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt? There is a ton of confusion about this, with good reason. It is a very confusing subject. Let me start by stating the obvious. Reasonable doubt is a high standard, very high. As William Blackstone put it hundreds of years ago, it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent suffer. And this is one of the key precepts of our justice system. For a person to be convicted of a crime, justice requires near certainty that the person actually did the crime. However, beyond a reasonable doubt does not require the prosecution address all possible doubts. It only requires that the jury hold a firm conviction that the defendant is guilty of the crime for which she stands accused. One way of thinking about this issue is that if there is another plausible explanation for what occurred, then the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt has not been met. Period. Now that we know the law, let's look at the evidence in this case and see if a prosecutor could actually bring charges and convict Carole Baskin of the murder of Don Lewis based on the evidence and information presented in Tiger King. Let's start with the physical evidence. We know that Don Lewis disappeared on August 18, 1997. On that day, he supposedly left his home around 6 a.m. This information came from Carole Baskin, who happens to be the last person to claim to see Don alive. He supposedly left some real estate signs at his lawyer's office. The signs were there, but no one recalls seeing Don leave them. And then, nothing. Interestingly, on the day that Don disappeared, Carole had left the property to get milk for the cats at 3 a.m. This is an odd fact. Most people are not out and about at 3 a.m. However, most people are not caring for 130 exotic cats. In addition, Carole claims to have run into her brother, who is a member of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. Her story is that her brother gave her a ride after she ran into car trouble. I tried to find out her brother's name or if he had been interrogated as part of the investigation. I could not find either, but this is a potential loose end that needs to be tied up. The Hillsborough County Sheriff has indicated that he does not think that Baskin's brother helped her cover anything up. However, it seems that, at a minimum, a bit more investigation would be called for. Again, Don Lewis disappeared on August 18. On August 19, Carole, who was married to Don at the time, called the police and reported him missing. The following day, August 20, 1997, Don's van was found at Pilot Country Airport in Spring Hill, Florida. Don was a pilot, albeit one that no longer had a valid pilot certificate, but it was well known that he loved airplanes. So finding his van at a general aviation airport is something that could be expected. This particular airport was about 40 miles away from the animal park where Don lived with Carole. The police allowed Carole to move the van back to the animal park where they looked at it. The police found Don's briefcase, but there was no sign that Don was killed in the van, and they did not find any evidence that led them any closer to solving Don's disappearance or murder. Given that Don's briefcase was in the van, it at least suggests that Don had been there. However, the briefcase obviously could have been planted there for the police to find, so it's hard to say how much weight to put on that evidence. Now, as far as physical evidence around Don's disappearance or murder, that is about it. And obviously, this kind of physical evidence is not enough to implicate anyone. It's a bust. Does that mean that Carole is off the hook? Not yet. One of the strongest pieces of evidence in this case is that Don filed for a restraining order against Carole a few months before his disappearance. The restraining order, which we will walk through in a moment, claims that Carole had threatened to kill him multiple times and that she had a .45 caliber pistol. It also claims that she had hidden Don's .357. Apparently, before his disappearance, Don had given this restraining order to his assistant, Anne McQueen, and asked her to give the order to the police if anything happened to him. This indicates that Don believed that Carole might actually try to kill him at some point, and the minimum makes Carole the prime suspect. But let's look a little more closely at this document and see what kind of a picture it really paints. This is the second time Carole has got angry enough to threaten to kill me. I was away from our house 40 acres. She gave two junkmen permission to come on property and remove truck and equipment that I had stored there that a man owed me $17,000 on. When I found out, the man that owned the equipment had to call sheriff to make them stop. When I got back, me and Carole got in a big fuss. She ordered me out of the house or she would kill me. There's a note here that says 6/12/97 most violent, which probably means this confrontation happened on June 12, 1997. The application for restraining order continues. If I came back, she would kill me. She has a .45 revolver and she took my .357 and hid it. I have owned the home and land 17 years. We've only lived there 3 years. I have a lot of equipment and animals and cats there. I have 132 exotic cats I take care of. Let's parse this. One fact that keeps coming up is that Don was frequently away from home for a variety of reasons. He was allegedly a womanizer and he had business interests in Costa Rica at a minimum. Apparently, while he was away, Carole started to clear out some of his possessions. In this particular case, a truck and equipment. One allegation that Carole made was that as Don got older, he liked to collect junk. When you look at it this way, this is the type of domestic fight that married couples get into all the time. One partner likes to keep lots of junk, the other partner likes things to be neat and tidy. When the messy partner is away, the neat one tidies up, and there is a fight when the messy one comes home. That dynamic was clearly at play here. However, there are a few added wrinkles. Lewis claims that Carole threatened to kill him. That's out of the ordinary even for standard domestic squabbles. Healthy people do not threaten murder once, much less twice. Carole has denied that she made those threats, but there are no indications that Don was a liar. The opposite. His friends and family say he was a straightforward guy. So she probably did threaten to kill him. Nonetheless, when you look at this as a whole, it is not really enough to prosecute Carole. She threatened to kill him when she was enraged and he was upset enough to seek a restraining order. When the order was denied, he went back to living with her in the same house, at least for a few months, then he disappeared. Now there is more. Don had reputedly wanted to get a divorce. In fact, he had told his former wife and children this, as well as his friends and business partners. Carole admits that Don had brought up divorce several times, but did not think that he was serious about it. In addition, Don supposedly had a girlfriend in Costa Rica, which adds a bit of credence to the divorce allegations. The divorce issue is kind of interesting, especially when you add it to the infidelity allegations. It adds a motivation to a possible murder. Don was going to leave Carole and take all of his money to Costa Rica so that she would not have anything except for, presumably, the wildlife park and the cats. However, this does not mesh with some other evidence. Most importantly, Don seemed to love the cats, and up and leaving them just does not seem to make a lot of sense. Don mentioned the cats several times in his petition for a restraining order, and his friends agree that he loved the cats. So it seems unlikely that he would just up and leave Carole with the cats. In addition, if he was really serious about the divorce, why did he continue to live with Carole? Finally, even if he did apply for divorce, it's not like Carole would have ended up with nothing. That's just not the way that divorce works. Therefore, it's pretty unlikely that Carole killed Don just because of the divorce allegations. At least this allegation would not be enough for a prosecutor to indict her. Don't get me wrong. The restraining order, including the threats that Carole had made against him, along with the fact that he felt strongly enough about the threats that he gave a copy of the order to Anne McQueen and asked her to give it to the police if anything happened to him, that is powerful evidence. Probably the most powerful evidence that there is, but it's not enough. There is more to discuss, though. Anne McQueen, Don's assistant, claims that Carole broke into her office and took out certain documents shortly after Don disappeared. These documents included Don's will and a power of attorney. Don's handyman backs this up. He claims that Carole asked him to help her get into the office. Anne McQueen claims that she had seen the will before and that she had been the executor. After Don was declared dead, 5 years after his disappearance, the will that Carole produced in court named Carole as the executor, and it was not the same will. The will that McQueen had seen had left most of Don's estate to his children. This will left almost everything to Carole. And there is substantial evidence that Carole forged the will. One of the witnesses that was named in the will admitted that she lied when she testified that she saw the will being signed. And at least one handwriting expert has stated that he believes that Don's signature was traced, meaning that the will Carole presented in court very well could have been a fraud. So let's just assume that Carole forged her husband's will. Does this mean that she killed her husband? Not really. It means that she's greedy. And there are a lot of greedy people that would be perfectly willing to forge a will, but not to murder someone. That leaves one more piece of information that I want to cover. Carole has refused to take a lie detector test. Twice. Supposedly, she refused to take a lie detector test on advice of counsel. Given the nature of the allegations against her, if she were innocent, a lie detector would have put this issue behind her. The statute of limitations for the will has long since passed, so this is a fairly damning piece of information. You'll notice that I said it was a damning piece of information and not a damning piece of evidence. The reason for that is simple. The refusal to take the lie detector is not admissible as evidence. Nonetheless, the implications of her refusing to take a lie detector, simply put, are powerful and negative. She knows something that she does not want found out. Whether that is that she killed Don Lewis, or maybe that Don was killed by someone else who is threatening her, or what have you, who knows? In any event, a jury would never hear that she refused to take a lie detector, and without that key bit of information, it would be very hard to convince a jury that she did anything wrong. However, there is little doubt that her refusal to take a lie detector test will keep her as the primary suspect. It seemed that a lot of people either offered to take a lie detector test or actually did, with Baskin being a notable absence. One person that would be interesting to interrogate with a lie detector would be Carole Baskin's brother. As a law enforcement officer, it seems that he should be willing to take a lie detector test and answer questions as to his activities and Baskin's activities on the night that Don Lewis disappeared. The same night that Baskin went out for milk at 3 a.m. for her tigers, and her car broke down, and she ran into this brother who happened to be a member of the sheriff's department. It seems like Baskin's brother taking a lie detector test is something that should happen. And if he refused, it's a strong indication that he has something to hide. That brings us to the core question. Based on what we know, the facts and evidence about the disappearance of Don Lewis, and specifically about Carole Baskin's potential role in it, could a prosecutor bring an indictment against Carole? And while there certainly is evidence against her, and a number of facts that make her the prime suspect, the answer is no. Without more evidence, something that ties her definitively to Don's disappearance and possible murder, no. A prosecutor could not indict Carole, and quite frankly, if a prosecutor did bring an indictment, I expected the judge would either throw the indictment out or the jury would acquit her. There are simply too many ways that Don could have disappeared or been killed that had nothing to do with Carole. He could have absconded to Costa Rica. It's not likely, but it's certainly reasonable doubt. He could have been killed by someone else, a drug dealer. Supposedly he was lending them money. One of his business partners could have killed him. Allegedly, he was involved in a lot of shady deals. Another mistress could have done the deed as well. Don was said to have a roving eye. Literally, the facts as we know them leave all sorts of scenarios open where Carole literally had nothing to do with what happened to Don. What other evidence would be required for a prosecutor to actually bring the case? A prosecutor needs something that cuts off some of those possibilities. Something that points the finger at Carole and says that she is the person that did it. A witness that saw Carole doing something suspicious, moving something that looked like a body on the day in question. Evidence that Carole knew Don would be out of the picture ahead of the date that he disappeared. Something that showed that she was actively making plans for his disappearance. That could do it as well. If Carole actually did it, it is very likely that a witness exists that could tie this up. Of course, it's been more than 20 years and no one has come forward. So that's my verdict. The Tiger King documentary does not really make the case that Carole Baskin killed her husband, at least from the viewpoint of a prosecutor. What do you think? Do you think that a prosecutor could actually bring an indictment and have a chance to convict Carole Baskin? What do you think is the strongest evidence against her? Did I miss anything important? Leave your response in the comments. I would love to see them. And that does it for today. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be appreciated. And if you are interested in more content like this in the future, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay safe and have a fantastic day.